In this lesson, we will talk about functions. With functions, we can reuse blocks of code throughout our program. Let's say there is a set of operations that we use more than one time in our program. In this case, we can put it inside a function, and instead of repeating those lines of code, we can just invoke the function every time we need it. To create a function, we are going to use the def statement. Then we pick a name following the variable name rules. So say hello would be a valid name. Then inside parentheses, we should pass the arguments of the function. For this first example, we won't pass any arguments, but we need the parentheses here anyway. Now we use a colon, and all the indented code after that is going to be part of our function. So the code we are going to execute inside here is just a print statement. Now let's run this program and see what happens. As you can see, nothing happened here. This is because when we create a function, the code is not executed. We are just creating a function. If we want to execute it, we need to invoke the function. So to do that, we just write the name of the function and open and close parentheses. Here is where we are going to pass the arguments, but this function has no arguments, so we can just leave this empty. If we run this program again, now the code has been executed. And we can execute it again and again. This function is not very useful because it prints the same message every time. It would be good if our function was dynamic. And in order to do that, we're gonna have to use arguments. Have you noticed that most of the function we used so far had arguments? Let's see how the print function works. So we are invoking the print function, and we need to pass an argument that is the value we want to be printed. We can also pass multiple arguments in this function. We saw other functions like the float function, which converts the value we pass as argument into a float number. We saw the type function that returns the type of a value we pass as an argument. We also saw the round function that accepts two arguments, being the first one the number we want to round, and the second argument the number of decimal places we want. So those are all Python built-in functions, and this is how they work. Now let's go back to our own functions. So how can we pass arguments to our function? When we are creating the function, we are going to pass a variable that is going to be the function argument. Now we can use the value of this variable inside our function. So we can say hello to this specific person. So hello. Now the name of the person. And when are we going to assign a value to this variable? It's when we invoke the function. So when we call the function say hello, we're gonna have to pass an argument. That can be Mary. So Mary is going to be assigned to this variable called person, and this value is going to be used inside it. So now we can say hello to different people using the same function. Pretty cool, right? Now I want to show you something a bit different. This function we just created just executes a print statement. This is a dynamic function. We are using an argument to say hello to different people, but we are limited to printing this message. This is what this function is going to do every time. It would be nice if our function just returned a value so we can do anything we want with that value. So let's create a new function called var to Celsius. This function is going to convert a temperature from Fahrenheit to Celsius. So as an argument of this function, I'm going to pass a temperature in Fahrenheit. Inside the function, I'm going to create a variable called Celsius, and I'm going to use the formula to make the conversion, which is 5 multiplied by the temperature in Fahrenheit minus 32, and all that divided by 9. Now, instead of printing the temperature in Celsius, I'm going to return the value. Now the difference is that I'm not stuck to this print statement. I can do anything I want with this value. I can print it. So let's convert 100 degrees Fahrenheit into Celsius and print it. This looks like the same thing we just did here, but we added one more line of code. But actually it's different because I can print different messages. I can add here Celsius. I can even use the round function to round this number. So this function is going to return the temperature in Celsius, which I can use inside the round function. So let's round it to 2 decimal places. Now I can use this value to convert Celsius into Kelvin. So what I'm going to do is getting the result in Celsius and adding 273.5, which is how you convert a Celsius temperature into Kelvin. So we are using the result of our function in multiple ways. Let's run it and see what happens. Another important thing to mention is that we can have as many arguments as we want in a function. So let's change this one and let's use person1 and person2. So here we are going to put person1, and we are also going to use person2 in this message. So we're just going to write something like person2 is waiting for you. Now when we call this function, if we pass only one argument, this is going to result in an error. As you can see here, it says it is missing one required positional argument. So if we have 2 arguments, we need to pass those 2 arguments, and they have to be in the same order they were when we created the function. So if we call the function like this, Jane is going to be person1 and Tim is going to be person2. And now our function has been executed without any problem. Now, how can we have functions like the round function in which we can inform the number of decimal places or not? So we can either use 1 argument or 2 arguments. We can assign a default value for an argument. So when we create the function, if we use the equal sign and pass a value here, say the director, this is going to be the default value of this argument if this argument is missing when calling the function. So if we do like this, now we are just passing person1, and instead of getting an error this time, let's see what happens. Now we are using the default value as the value of this argument. The arguments of a function are also called parameters. So we just omitted the second parameter and the default value has been used. In the case of the round function, if we omit the number of decimal places, it just rounds the number without any decimal places. So the default value is 0. Okay, that was all for this lesson. I'll see you in the next video.